Hello and welcome to In News program. Today's topic of discussion is the economics of climate change in India. Points of discussion will be background, what is the evidence of climate change, how vulnerable is India to climate change, what is the macroeconomic impact of climate change on India, can policies provide some solutions, and practice questions. So first of all, moving on to the background. Over the past few weeks, a lot of discussion is going on the topic that how extreme weather conditions have disrupted the normal life in India. The whole country is witnessing the effects of climate change. The Global Climate Risk Index 2021 released by the international environmental think tank German Watch had ranked India 7th in the list of most affected countries in terms of exposure and vulnerability to climate risk events. The RBI, in its latest report of Currency and Finance 2022 to 2023, has made an effort to answer the looming questions on the effect of climate change on India's economy. Now, is climate change real? Many people argue that there are phases of Earth and currently the Earth is in its warming phase. How do we know climate change is real? There is unequivocal evidence that Earth is warming at an unprecedented rate. Scientists have known for some time from multiple lines of evidence that humans are changing Earth's climate. What is the evidence of climate change? The obvious indicators of climate change include the anomalies in temperature and precipitation. The annual temperature in India has been rising gradually, and according to a RBI paper, this rise has been sharper in the past 20 years than during any other 20-year time interval since 1901. Similarly, the southwest monsoon has been becoming more erratic. Notably, while the average rainfall during the past 20 years, that is from 2000 to 2020, has increased, but the annual rainfall has gradually declined. Moreover, evidence suggests that while dry spells have become more frequent during the last several years, intense wet spells have also increased. Research about natural disasters since 1975 has shown that India is relatively more exposed to floods and storms, that is cyclones and hailstorms, than droughts and heat waves. Now let's understand how vulnerable is India to climate change. To determine the vulnerability of India to climate change, two factors needs to be considered: India's geographical attributes and structure of India's economy. The structure of India's economy has changed since independence, with more focus on services sector than on agriculture and allied services. This has significant implications for carbon emissions because services are globally considered to be emission light with relatively lower energy intensity of output. Though the sectoral composition of the Indian economy helps reduce its carbon emissions, but the share of fossil fuels has an overwhelmingly large share in India's primary energy consumption, and this fact needs to change. What is the macroeconomic impact of climate change on India? The cascading effect of climate change can be felt on both supply and demand side. It can stoke inflation, reduce economic output, trigger uncertainty, and change consumer behavior. Typically, the risks from climate change are categorized in two main ways. First is physical risk. These include chronic issues such as a gradual and sustained change in temperature and precipitation, as well as acute events such as extreme weather occurrences. And transition risk, simply put, these refers to economy-wide changes arising from the transition towards a low-carbon economy. Over the years, there have been several predictions and assessments made about the impact of climate change on India's economy. Some are listed below. According to 𝐈𝐀𝐒 𝐏𝐫𝐞𝐥𝐢 in 2019, around 600 million of India's population are facing severe water stress, with 8 million children below 14 years in urban India at risk due to poor water supply. The World Bank in 2020 said that India could account for 34 million of the projected 80 million global job losses from heat stress associated productivity decline by 2030. The IPCC working group in 2022 stated that India is one of the most vulnerable countries globally in terms of the population that would be affected by the sea level rise. And by the middle of the present century, around 35 million people in India could face annual coastal flooding, with 45 to 50 million at risk by the end of the century. Now, can policies provide some solutions? The network of central banks and supervisors for greening the financial system have created an analytical framework called the National Institute Global Econometric Model to produce policy insights. In this model, the researchers looked at how GDP growth rate and inflation would be affected under 6 different policy stances when compared to the baseline, which is the best case scenario involving no impact of climate change. Impact on GDP. The researchers have argued that India's GDP will be impacted no matter whatever the policy decisions are. However, global scenarios of current policies and nationally determined contributions have the highest negative impact on output, whereas rapidly moving towards net zero by 2050 will contain the hit to GDP. Impact on inflation. Moving towards net zero by 2050 will spike inflation far more in the immediate future than continuing on current policies. Overall, these trade-offs will become sharper as India tries to achieve the twin goals of achieving net zero emissions by 2070 and becoming an advanced economy, which implies higher emissions by 2047. Now moving on to practice questions. First of all, prelims question. Consider the following statements. 1. The average rainfall in India during the past 20 years, that is from 2000 to 2020, has increased. 2. The annual rainfall in India during the past 20 years has declined. Which of the above given statement or statements is or are correct? 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, or neither 1 nor 2. Now mains question. India's over-dependence on coal and other fossil fuels for energy needs pose a big challenge in its way of achieving net zero goals. Do you agree? Substantiate your views with examples. So that's all for today. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for watching.